When most people look at a shipping container, they see a box, a steel rectangle stacked on a ship, somewhere far away. But inside global trade, the container is not treated like cargo. It is treated like infrastructure. Because almost everything moving through the modern economy must pass through this shape first. Your phone, your shoes, your refrigerator, your coffee machine. Before any of those products reach a store, they usually spend weeks inside one of these steel boxes. And despite crossing different countries, different oceans, and different transport systems, the boxes themselves are almost always identical. Not similar? Identical. A container built in Shanghai can lock perfectly onto a truck in Germany, a train wagon in Chicago, or a cargo ship in Singapore without modification. That level of coordination sounds normal today, but it is one of the most unnatural systems humanity has ever built. Because before containers, global trade did not move like a machine, it moved like chaos. Before standard containers existed, cargo moved piece by piece. This system was called break bulk shipping, and it was brutally inefficient. Every product required different handling. Coffee arrived in sacks, bananas came in wooden crates, machinery traveled in custom frames, oil moved in barrels. At ports, thousands of workers manually lifted cargo onto ships, one item at a time. A single vessel could spend more than a week sitting at port, just loading and unloading freight. In 1965, a typical cargo ship spent 60% of its time docked. Not sailing, but waiting for manual loading. After containerization, that number dropped to 20%. The same ship, the same cargo. But the interface changed, and suddenly time disappeared, and every transfer created friction. Cargo was damaged, items disappeared, schedules collapsed constantly. The docks were not synchronized systems, they were industrial bottlenecks. But the real problem was deeper than labor. The problem was incompatibility. Trucks used one format, railways used another, ships used another. Nothing connected cleanly. Every transition required repacking. Every repacking required time. And time was destroying global trade. Because ships were no longer limited by oceans. They were limited by interfaces. Then came a surprisingly simple idea. Not a faster ship, not a larger port. A standardized box. In the 1950s, American trucking entrepreneur Malcolm McLean proposed something radical. Instead of unloading cargo piece by piece, what if the entire trailer itself became the cargo unit? At first, the idea sounded absurd. Ports would need giant cranes, ships would require redesigns, rail systems would need rebuilding. Entire coastlines would have to reorganize themselves around a steel rectangle. But McLean understood something most people did not. The future of trade was not about transportation, it was about transfer. The faster cargo could move between systems, the faster the economy itself could move, and that changed the logic of shipping completely, because now the cargo no longer mattered operationally, the box mattered. For the first time in history, global trade had a common language, geometry. A crane operator in Rotterdam lifts a container that was packed in Shenzhen. He does not know what is inside, he does not need to. The four corner fittings lock into his crane's spreader. 20 feet, 8 feet, 8.5 feet. That is all the machine needs to know. The contents are irrelevant. The interface is everything. At first glance, standardization seems restrictive. Why force everything into the same dimensions? Wouldn't specialized containers be more efficient? For individual products, yes. For global systems, absolutely not. Because logistics is not governed by optimization, it is governed by synchronization. A perfectly optimized container for televisions becomes useless if it cannot fit the crane, the ship, the train, or the warehouse waiting for it. The container succeeded because it sacrificed local efficiency for global compatibility. That trade-off reshaped the physical world. Ports became modular. Ships became scalable. Warehouses became automated. Instead of treating cargo as millions of unique objects, the system began treating them as standardized units of movement. And once that happened, global trade stopped behaving like traditional transportation. It started behaving like software. Today, the backbone of the industry is the 20-foot container, known globally as the TEU, the 20-foot equivalent unit, roughly 20 feet long, 8 feet wide, 8.5 feet tall. In 2023, roughly 250 million TEUs moved across the world's oceans. That is 250 million identical steel boxes, each one obeying the exact same dimensions, moving through every port, every railway, every highway on Earth. Not because each box is special, but because every box is the same. Those dimensions were not chosen randomly. They emerged from compromise, large enough to carry meaningful cargo, small enough to pass through roads, rail systems, bridges, tunnels, and ports around the world. But the real breakthrough was not the size, it was the corners. Every container uses identical corner fittings. That means cranes, ships, trucks, and railcars do not need to understand what is inside. They only need to understand the geometry of the box. That dramatically reduced complexity. A container filled with toys and a container filled with chemicals became operationally identical. And once the interface became standardized, everything around it evolved to match. Ships became wider, ports became deeper, cranes became taller. Entire coastlines were redesigned around the dimensions of a steel rectangle. The result was extraordinary. Global shipping became scalable. A vessel carrying 500 containers operates on the same logic as a vessel carrying 24,000. The boxes stack. The cranes scale. The software tracks coordinates. The container transformed trade into industrial mathematics. Without standardization, modern megaships would not exist. Amazon-scale logistics would not exist. Globalized manufacturing would not exist, because the true bottleneck in trade is not movement across oceans. It is coordination between systems. And the container solved coordination by forcing the world to obey the same geometry. But systems built on standardization develop a hidden weakness: dependence. Because when every part of the network depends on identical assumptions, disruption spreads faster. A port delay in China can shut down factories in Germany. A shortage of empty containers in Los Angeles can disrupt exporters in Vietnam. Because every layer of the system is synchronized to the same physical structure. The container made globalization faster. But it also made globalization more fragile. And during the pandemic, that fragility became visible. In late 2021, over 100 container ships anchored outside Los Angeles and Long Beach, waiting an average of 21 days just to enter port. Containers accumulated in the wrong ports. 40,000 empty boxes sat in Los Angeles. While factories in Vietnam shut down, not because demand disappeared, but because the correct empty box was 7,000 miles away. A furniture retailer in Chicago ordered sofas in March. They arrived in November, not because the factory was slow, but because the container spent 6 months waiting in the wrong position. The world did not run out of goods, it ran out of positioning. Because in synchronized systems, location becomes as important as production itself. And this reveals something deeper about modern civilization. The shipping container looks simple, but simplicity can hide enormous complexity. Behind this steel box is one of the largest coordination systems humanity has ever constructed. A system where ports, railways, factories, software platforms, shipping companies, and entire governments all agree to obey the exact same dimensions. Not because the container is perfect, but because agreement is more valuable than perfection. Large systems do not scale through customization. They scale through standardization, through shared rules, through interfaces every machine can understand. The container became powerful because the world stopped reinventing the connection point. And once that happened, global trade could finally move continuously, like electricity through a circuit. Today, we often imagine globalization as something digital. Cloud servers, financial markets, invisible data flows. But underneath all of it, global trade still depends on physical steel moving through physical space. And most of it moves inside the same box. The shipping container did not become universal because it was revolutionary technology. It became universal because humanity agreed to standardize the interface between systems. That decision reshaped ports, labor, manufacturing, coastlines, consumption, and the structure of the global economy itself. Because once every box became the same size, the world could finally move as one synchronized machine. And ever since then, globalization has been measured 20 feet at a time.